Look, I know this is the city, but if you're going to run a company of trained line artists, you would think there'd be some measures in place to keep them alive. But as it happens, the Shi Association, specifically the southern branches, are managed by a faceless fool that only kept his job because of a blue hobo into architectural vor. That sentence sounds insane on the surface, but somehow all of it is true, and dozens of fixers suffered for it. And now that we're probably 30 seconds into the video, it's my pleasure to tell you that today, we're diving into the Shi, the city's own association of assassination, their culture, their abilities, and how one man's desperate grab for power utterly fucked them all over. Now, many of us are aware of the Shi Association as those guys in Limbus and LOR that get stronger the closer they are to death. And while that's true, what I personally found interesting about them is that this iconic gimmick shouldn't exist. Not that it's badly designed or anything, I actually really like playing against it in LOR, but because all of these skills only developed because of the Shi's management making choices that go against their own principles. So that begs the question, what are those principles? Going from the Shi Association Fixer's credenza page, being an organization that is familiar with dealing death, the Shi's code of honor is to treat every person equally, as the weight of death is equal for everyone. The page goes on to say that no matter the target or the client, as long as they're paid, the Shi will take on the job without judgment and with discretion. And while a part of this is absolutely for the sake of keeping the business afloat, a significant number of the fixers in the Shi Association hold this sense of equality in high regard. The best example of this being the Shi fixers from Library of Ruina, Tenma, Valentine, and Eugen. We only get one reception cutscene with them, but even that's enough to tell a full story of the struggle they're dealing with. Every association is split into 4 quadrants, north, east, south, and west. And the Shi's South Branch manager, Thelma, has been sending endless jobs their way. More specifically, these are urban nightmare jobs that would typically take a week each to finish, and nearly a half dozen were just dealt to Eugen's team, Section 2, in only 10 days. This caused many of her team's fixers to die, and the 3 here to suffer from extreme exhaustion and injuries without any time to recover. By now, the team knows that no matter how well they handle these jobs, another one will immediately be sent to replace it until all of them are dead. A large reason for this is because Eugen has been investigating Argalia, also known as the Blue Reverberation, one of the most noteworthy figures in the city, who has been recruiting powerful people to his side. And what she's found suggests that he's planning something destructive that she intends to bring to the head. However, Argalia has also befriended Thelma by ensuring that he keeps his position as the manager of the Southern Branch. And to repay that kindness, he asks Thelma to have the Shi take out some hand-picked targets. As a result of that, and Thelma knowing that Eugen was investigating him and the Blue Reverberation, an avalanche of orders came their way, leading to where we are now. But Eugen has a plan. One of the groups Argalia has recruited is the Musicians of Bremen, whose book was recently left at the library, one of her assigned targets. If she and her team can take down the library and retrieve the book, they can find out what he's up to and a way to stop Argalia before the entire team is obliterated. So with this staunch conviction, Eugen, Valentine, and Tenma head into the library, hoping this next push will be their last. And they were right. Now, as unprecedented as it is for someone to die in the library, we should still take stock of their strategy while they were mid-fight, because this shows an interesting divide in the Shi's identity. I mentioned earlier that the Shi was known especially for their skills that get more powerful the further they're pushed into a corner. In Library of Ruina, they get pages that increase their power at low health, passives that grant more light after using it all up, and a fatigue passive that gives members of the Shi more power as their allies fall. Each of these, both in name and gameplay, are based on exhaustion, self-damaging, and overexerting themselves while finding power through this. These also represent different obstacles that the Shi's had to deal with under Thelma's onslaught of work. But why does this matter? Duh, if the team's been dragged through the dirt in the story, their gameplay is gonna match that. But that's the thing. This isn't all the Shi is. Both in Tenma's combat pages and key page story, she focuses on using speed to become more powerful. Valentine's the patron saint of singular strike and extreme edge. And Eugen's got a little page some people might know about called Boundary of Death? None of these are abilities that have to do with exhaustion and are all distinct in their own ways. And hell, if we drag in the Limbus IDs for a second, they follow a similar pattern. Dawn prioritizes getting speed up to become more powerful, and Ishmael has a healing mechanic on crit. Shi Heathcliff is the only one that leans solely into the low HP gimmick, which is weird because I thought there'd have been something noteworthy to say about using this ID. Oh well. Either way, we can safely say the vast majority of the named Shi units have more varied skill sets. And the reason this is important is because these skill sets are what the Shi fixers were originally meant to use. The art book mentions that the Shi's practice emphasizes efficient means of killing, finding weak points, and executing plans promptly, which all of these strategies embody. So if that's the case, all of the desperate skills that the fixers adopted during this deluge of work were learned on the fly by being adaptable. And to me, that just makes Eugen, Valentine, and Tenma all the more impressive and likable. They weren't just a trio of fixers trying to get out from under a corrupt system puppeted by a madman, but were able to keep a steady head and remember what's really important despite everything Thelma put them through. Which also means it's a shame that none of this worked out, but there is at least one silver lining. Thelma is dead! Yeah, our faceless offender ended up falling into Argalia's trap by not taking down the library, and since that was one of the targets on his list, there's some consequences! Bozo was taken out to the back streets of District 23, flayed up, and left to rot for the sweepers. So fixers, feathers, and fingers?
We got him!
This man's not gonna hurt anyone ever again, and the Shi can go back to normal. And the Shi can go back to normal. And the Shi can go back to normal. And the Shi... Okay, look. We don't get a ton from the Shi's uptie cutscenes in comparison to other Limbus IDs, but Shi Ishmael's gives us enough to tell that the other Shi sections are getting shafted too. Now, to be fair, it's unclear if the events here take place at the same time as the events in LOR, or if they're in the present, since uptie stories don't always take place at the same point in time. So if we assume that this did take place during Thelma's reign, this makes sense. But if we assume that this takes place around the time of Limbus Company, that changes a lot. Because it's not like these guys are Valpurgis IDs and represent the LOR characters. These guys are from Section 5, not Section 2. And while I do have to mention that in Kanto 4, after Shren got her sideways tattoo, Ishmael clarified that the Section 5 and 6 southern branches were amateurs, in Library of Ruina, there was a whole other section that got wiped out before Eugen's story even began. And if these IDs are amateurs, that's every reason they would focus on learning skills based on what they're dealing with right now. And if you're thinking, Frey, haven't you lost the plot a bit? Well, you're not seeing the bigger picture here! There are only two possibilities for what's happening with the Shi's practices. Either Thelma was a low point for the Southern Branch, or this overworked culture, which I will say is more extreme than the other associations, wasn't just exclusive to Library of Ruina, but continued to some extent into Limbus Company should the IDs take place there. Or worse yet, this has always been a problem even before Library of Ruina. Because even if we use Eugen as a reference to call this a low point, that doesn't necessarily mean things were perfect before or after, does it? All of the unnamed fixers from the Southern Shi lean super hard into the low HP strats, even using self-damaging pages. So, did they just learn on the fly as newcomers? Or was the association always an unhealthy place to work? Not to mention, Ishmael's uptie cutscene also shows that she did odd jobs as a fixer before being invited to the Shi. So they do look for people that are willing to do just about anything. And sure, Eugen and her team were struggling under their own greater burden, I get that. But they had other skills to fall back on. Can you imagine being one of those generic fixers? The only thing you've learned is how to deal with terrible situations while your body's close to breaking, let alone being under the weight that Thelma thrust onto everyone. Hell, that's a totally different experience from Eugen, but it's not like anyone who was there has any dialogue about it. I mean, the closest we could know is how it feels to be Shi Heathcliff, since he's clearly the newest member in the Shi Mirror World. But his cutscene doesn't say much else than that. So how the fuck can I get the perspective of someone that's intimately familiar with these self-damaging methods, also knows what it's like to throw yourself into seemingly impossible odds where it could be an endless amount of time to know what it's like? You're asking me to find one of the world's ultimate masochists! On April 18th, 2024, YouTube user Rip Kully began streaming himself fighting the final boss of Olympus Company's Kanto 6 in a stream called Sheath. The stream went on for nearly 11 hours, but ended without him beating the boss a single time. This is because he had decided to try a solo run using Shi Heathcliff, something that the meta part of Limbus calls a bad ID. And I don't really pay too much attention to meta since that's just not how I enjoy the game. But the Sheath stream had come off of 2 other videos where Rip Kully had beaten the same fight with a different single ID. The stream ending this way, making it feel like this was impossible to complete until he streamed this again, and again, and again, and again, and again. There are over 40 documented hours of this stream on YouTube, which caught the attention of the community to a large degree. Hell, I tend to avoid watching other PM creators' content, but got curious enough to check out the stream to see it was a genuinely inspiring time, even amid the numerous losses. Now, this isn't my story to tell, nor is it the purpose of the video. I do admire the guy's attitude in choosing to play how he wants, and he did eventually win the challenge. But more importantly, Rip Kully is likely the only person in the world who not only experienced being Shi Heathcliff for over 40 hours, but did so under conditions as close to those Eugen experienced as I can ever hope to get. If I want to know what it was like to be a baseline Shi fixer during those terrible times, this is my best chance. So after getting his permission, I asked him a few questions about his time during the challenge. Kully explained that during the entire ordeal, he knew that Shi Heath would stay under the 50% HP boundary of death, never having to wonder what it'd be like to deal with not getting the low health buffs the ID sports. And while there was a moment during the run that required him wrangling dogs out of his control, look, if you know, you know. Kully saw the whole thing as inevitable, knowing that luck may not have been on his side, but he could take as many shots as he needed to eventually make the kill. And lastly, he mentioned that the best way he was able to keep going was to think of how close his next shot would be to finishing, how fun it was to improve, and not wanting to disappoint those cheering him on. And well, that last answer doesn't translate well to actually being a one-strike assassin like the Shi encourages, but I guess that's what I get for trying to make streaming poetic. Regardless, what I saw from this was that as Shi Heathcliff, you're balancing both playing the long game and keeping yourself up just for that tiny extra bit longer to make it pay off. The focus is beyond the single fight, but keeping yourself in a state of tension and anticipation to be at your best. Put differently, you accept that things aren't going to get comfortable for you anytime soon, but that they will later on. You just don't know when that later is. And as a coping mechanism, that's fine. Hell, I've done that. But as a workplace culture? Holy shit, that is MLM levels of manipulative. So if you're thinking of getting a job at the Shi Association, you're already walking the boundary of death, because there's at least a 1 in 4 chance that the office you join will slowly kill you. Best case scenario, Thelma was the only blip on an otherwise proud company motto. Worst case, they were just the straw that broke the camel's back. Either way, the Shi never deserved Eugen's team, and considering that she's Kim Ji-hoon's favorite guest, odds are we'll see her again someday. But in the meantime, I just hope she's out there updating her LinkedIn profile and talking shit to her heart's content. Hey, look, fancy seeing you here at the end of all things. While I have you, thanks again to Kully for being willing to take part in this video, and also to Everything Fantasy for allowing me to use their music in these essays. They made the remix used in that short montage at the start and clearly just love what they do. As always, another big thanks to my supporters, including our new accomplice, Dog. This whole video was meant as a little filler project, but I had a lot of fun with it in the process. We'll have Philip's story in a multi-parter next, but I've got some non-channel work piling up right now, so it'll take an extra week or so to get that on track. Either way, thanks for watching, and remember to sleep so the blue man doesn't get you.